Stanford University.
Okay.
Allow me to welcome you all back. I hope you had a leisurely and congenial lunch. In our third session today, we're going to be making a shift. We'll continue with the theme of research and experiment, but we'll be focusing in particular on the cultivation, the practices which cultivate compassion in us, and then examining whether or not those practices, as we have them designed by Tönchen Jinpa and his team, whether they are effective. We have, in addition to His Holiness the Dalai Lama for this session, we have Erica Rosenberg. I'm going to say hello, Erica. Who's a consulting scientist, Center for Mind and Brain at the University of California, Davis, and is also a meditation teacher at the Nyingma Institute of Tibetan Studies in Berkeley. In her work, she aims to bring together the tools of both science and practice to help people find happiness and freedom from suffering, in her own words. Thank you. Second, we have Philippe Golden, who's the head of the who's a senior research scientist and head of the Clinically Applied Affective Neuroscience Lab. And then finally, Jeannie Tsai, who is an associate director, who is associate professor in the psychology department at Stanford and director of the Stanford Culture and Emotion Laboratory, which examines how people's cultural ideas and practices shape their emotions. So we have a distinguished group together with us today, and we're going to start with Erica. Please.
Thank you. First, let me thank you for your inspiration to all of us and for your inspiration for the project that I'm going to tell you about. You spoke yesterday so eloquently about the importance of compassion training, of making this available to as many people as possible, and for having something that's not wedded to any particular religious point of view or worldview. And at CCARE, that's been part of our mission. It's the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education. Linda talked earlier about some of the work that's being done in the schools, bringing emotional learning together with mindfulness. And what I'm going to present today is an 8-week training program that we've developed here under the leadership of my esteemed colleague, Tönchen Jinpa. We're really working from this question: can compassion be cultivated? And we think the answer to this is yes. But the idea here is that we want to connect into that very inherent nature that we all have. I think there's been a lot of research presented today to say that we're really wired for compassion. As mammals, we have a strong nurturing instinct. But for some reason, in this culture in particular, we've gotten separated from that. And so that the idea with any kind of training program is to reconnect with that basic good nature, reconnect with that basic inclination to care for one another, and importantly, and I think we've touched on this with a couple speakers, the importance of taking care of ourselves and remembering to be kind to ourselves. So that all fits in to our view. So we had a few key aims in the development of this program. One, as I've said, that it be secular. We want to reach as many people as possible so that you do not have to be Buddhist in background or have any particular religious orientation, that it should be widely accessible to a wide range of people. Going along with that is the idea of simplicity, that anybody from a wide range of education levels or socioeconomic status would be able to learn this if they show up to the class with the proper motivation to develop this, that the tools should be accessible to many, many people. What goes along, I think, follows from these two goals of secular and secularity, I don't know if that's a word, and simplicity, is that it be standardized, and standardized. Yeah, so what we mean by that is that it's laid out, if we prepare a manual, which we have, that it's laid out in such a way that any qualified teacher would be teaching the same skills in the same way. And this is of utmost importance for dissemination. We want to disseminate it widely, so we have to know that it would be taught in the same way by different people. But this standardization is also really important for research. This is as much a research tool as an education tool. So if we want to first see if we can effectively train compassion, or if we also want to ask questions like, does compassion training benefit caregivers of people with Alzheimer's disease, people who are going through an extreme amount of stress in their giving relationship, we need to know that if we administer training to more than one group of people, that they're getting it in the same way. So that's why standardization was a key concern. So over the course of 8 weeks, and we meet once a week for 2 hours, and there are home practices, people have home exercises they do every day, we are building a progression of skills. We start with settling the mind. We are making no assumptions that people coming into this class will have any experience with meditation. Some of them might, and we've had students from a wide range of skill levels, but is of the utmost importance that people be able to calm the body, calm the mind, learn how to sustain attention and stabilize it, and be able to return to an object of focus in spite of distraction. So this is, as you know, foundational for doing any kind of inner contemplative work, but especially we build on that by bringing them more in tune with the changes in their bodies that they experience when they're feeling emotions, when they're connecting to other people's emotions. So we always have this strong foundation of settling the mind. And that is sort of like preparing the ground for reconnecting with the heart. Again, this is an intrinsic nature. So if they've created the spaciousness, maybe they can notice that quality within themselves more readily. And we work explicitly with practices for opening the heart, starting with, as is traditional, those people with whom it's easiest to think to extend compassion. So we start working with a loved one and having the students work with connecting their, really conjuring up their feelings of concern when a loved one was suffering and extending loving kindness to a loved one. Once we've moistened the heart, if you will, to use Jimpa's words, and made that more prepared them. It's easier now. We actually encourage them to kind of look within toward themselves and reconnect with that sense of caring for oneself. As we've discussed, and I think you've discussed in other forums, for Westerners in particular, it's difficult to direct love or compassion toward oneself. But we try to make it plain, You take care of your basic hygiene, you take care of your food and clothing, you take care of yourself emotionally, and self-soothing is a very basic thing. So contextualizing that as self-care. Once we've worked with that, we've kind of paved the way for moving out, broadening that circle of inclusiveness, and really trying to cultivate an empathic connection with other beings, reminding them of the fundamental similarity, sameness. You talked about this yesterday as well, that in spite of all our superficial dissimilarities, we all want the same thing. We all want happiness and its causes. We all want to be free from suffering and its causes. And that's just, It's so simple, but you know, when we get into that, it's almost a revelation for people to connect with that in an experiential way and remember that. So we do a lot of work with cultivating connection and recognizing interdependence. And that sort of sets the stage for starting to move out even more, broadening the circle of inclusiveness, not just to loved ones, but to strangers and people with whom their relationships are different, and beginning to work to generate active compassion. So this is what we work with over 8 weeks, and we rely on a variety of techniques to do this. So I thought the best way to illustrate this would be to show you an example class. This is sort of the setup for week 4 when we work on cultivating connection. We begin, as always, with settling the mind. Every class begins with this.
지금 말씀하실 때 가래. 바로 공개해 주세요.
So we start each class with settling the mind, just to kind of create a foundation, create a space, and everybody's coming from different places after work just to bring it all home. Then we move out into a discussion of what the theme of the week is, and in this case, it's connection and interdependence. Here we really ask our instructors to draw on a wide variety of areas. So we might, from Buddhist psychology, talk about interdependence, you know, and just simply the idea of how our actions affect others and others' actions affect us, and developing an appreciation for how everybody around us really wants the same thing, this fundamental wish for happiness. And we also might draw on some ideas or concepts or findings from Western psychology or neuroscience, talking about empathy research, or maybe, you know, mirror neurons in this case, that would be relevant, really broadening it out. Then we'll do a Western exercise, a more Western-derived exercise, plus guided meditations. And in this class, the Western exercise is done in pairs. We break people up into pairs, and it's a talking and listening exercise. And
active exercise today.
So in this case, the speaker is told to talk about something that's happened recently where they had great disappointment or suffering, and to share that with the listener. And the listener's job is to actively listen silently, not to offer advice, but more importantly, to try to imagine what it might have felt like to be in this person's shoes. And really conjure up in their body this feeling. So we're really working on the empathic shared feeling. And as we know from several theories of compassion, this resonance, this sharing of the feeling is crucial in the development of reaching out and wishing to help. Then we'll have a 30-minute guided meditation practice. In this class, we work on extending the circle of compassion, recognizing, importantly, the shared aspirations of all beings. And there's a nice little imagery exercise we go through of recognizing, for example, how many people are responsible for bringing you here to this moment and having clothes and food to eat, and all these countless individuals who you don't see. And it's to develop a wide net of appreciation. And then we have some of those guided meditations they do as part of their daily home practice, and we might also have a practical exercise, such as a gratitude practice, where at the end of the day, they think of all that they have that they're thankful for. So just to wrap up, we've offered this course. We've done it 4 complete times. We have 2 classes underway. Jeannie and Philippe will talk about some of our initial research efforts to establish the effectiveness of this. And what we're doing now is trying to train more teachers so we can offer this widely and extend the research beyond the effectiveness to look into some groups of people, such as those listed here, caregivers and teachers, who might be especially in need of this. And just, I want to acknowledge Jimpa and his key role in the development of this program as the main author of the training, with the myself and my other colleagues at CCARE who've contributed to the development of the training program, and CCARE for making this happen. So.
Thank you very much. And now we'll switch speakers. Philippe Golden will take on the chair. Thank you very much, Erica, for a window into the training which you provide into cultivation of compassion.
So thank you very much for being here. And this is just briefly some initial results from courses that were taught by Erica and Kelly McGonigal. Simply, the goal is, how does this compassion training influence social response to others, especially others who are suffering, emotions that we have, and attention. So far, 32 healthy adults, roughly 39 years old adults in the community, not students. And here I'm going to just show some data related to one task that we call the CARE video. We show videos of real people describing their own suffering in their own words. And the question is, does the compassion training that Thupten Jinpa and others put together, does it really affect how we care for other people, how we work with our emotions, and also how it might influence our attention? So I'm going to show a video clip, just a part, of a person describing their own suffering.
So my father died of congestive heart failure, and it's one of these things that it kind of took a couple of years to ultimately take its course. A few days before he died, about the week before, I had a business trip scheduled, and I got a call from my sister that he had been admitted to the hospital. Well, should I schedule my business trip or cancel it or whatever? And I was at a point in my career where I felt very insecure about doing something like that. I was halfway into my trip, and my sister called again and said he had been admitted to the hospital again, and it looked bad. So I canceled the rest of my trip after all. And my father had died while I was in transit, and I was never able to say goodbye to him. And it's just because I put this stupid trip, I can't even remember what it was about, ahead of seeing him one last time.
So we show several video clips, we do lots of assessment, but with response to this type of task, what we ask people, how much do you feel a sense of care for the person whose story you just heard? And what we see is, from before to after compassion training, increase in the sense of caring. From before to after compassion training, we see how willing are you to help this person? That goes up. How much time would you be willing to actually sit and talk with this person if I gave you the opportunity? And that also goes up after the compassion training. So these are the social responses. Then the question is, how might this be supported by changes in emotion? And what we found is anxiety when you're sitting with other people goes down after compassion training. And then also, for lots of us, we suppress showing our emotion, which is not adaptive, it's not helpful. And suppressing decreases after the compassion training. And then finally here, another way of working with emotion, which is much more beneficial, which is thinking in a way to change the meaning of the situation so that we feel less negative. That kind of working with emotion increases after compassion. And then finally, might the changes in emotion
His Holiness is wondering whether that ability to reinterpret the situation in a more constructive light, is it a direct effect of compassion itself, or something else is happening there?
Don't know yet. Shingme. And
My explanation is the compassion brings inner strength, and that creates a sort of calm mind, or calm mind can see the other sort of more holistic. That is why. Okay?
That could be true. Yeah.
And then finally, do the changes in social behavior and emotion, might they also be related to changes in attention? And here, one simple task with EEG, where a person puts their eyes on the red triangle, but they pay attention to the blue circle. Very, very simple. And we're only looking at the back of the brain here that has to do with visual processing. And very simply, what we find is that from before to after the 8-week compassion training, this neural signal increases, suggesting that people are more able to sustain their attention after this compassion training. And this might support the emotion. Possibly.
So the experiment involves simply asking them to keep your attention on the circle.
Yes.
That's all.
Which seems simple, but when you're doing it for about
I know,
20,
but that was the
that was it.
instruction.
Just how well you could actually sustain your attention without letting it distract.
So the way you define this is it detects if you have lost your visual attention.
We have continuous for 40 minutes or 30 minutes, continuous signal from this part of the brain where we can see from moment to moment, am I paying attention to the blue circle? Signal goes up. Not paying attention, goes down. And in summary, what I've shown you is that compassion cultivation training, this 2-month program, might, we have to do more work, change social behavior, more care, more help, more giving one's own time to others. It might change some aspects of emotion, less anxiety with other people, and increases the emotion, working with emotions effectively, and some evidence that there's increased sustained attention. Thank you. And thank you to CCARE and to Fetzer.
Thank you very much, Philip, for a wonderful presentation and a hopeful presentation. Tunjin Jimba is our translator, our interpreter, and he plays this extremely selfless role. I think very few people really realize how he's a fully trained monk, achieving a Geshe degree, which is it's like getting a PhD in his own tradition, and he brings all of that capacity to this project. So Jimpa, wonderful. Jeannie?
Great, thank you. Your Holiness, it's an honor to have this opportunity to present to you a second time. The first time was in Dharamsala, in the conference about destructive emotions. And in many ways, the research I'm going to tell you about today is an inspiration from that meeting. So thank you. I'm going to talk about 2 studies today. And the focus of these studies is the effects of meditation on compassion. But this is a particular type of compassion that we're interested in, the compassion that we can feel toward a convicted murderer. So in many ways, this is a very difficult test of meditation because it's hard to feel empathy, acceptance, and optimism for a convicted killer for most people. It's very difficult. So in the first study, my student Jocelyn showed meditators and non-meditators a letter from a prisoner. This was a letter from a real convicted murderer. He gave us his permission to use the letter, and we called him Mike. And in this letter, he says a number of things. He talks about how he's serving a natural life sentence without parole for murdering a friend in a blind fit of rage. And he talks about how he grew up with a lot of anger in his family, but that when in prison, he's begun to move beyond that hatred and pain. And so he admits his guilt, but he is trying to have some hope for some sort of freedom outside of his imprisoned mind. So even though he knows he'll continue to be in prison, he's still looking for some sort of spiritual freedom. And so he ends the letter by asking the readers to write him. So in the study that Jocelyn did, she showed meditators and non-meditators this letter, asked them a number of questions about the content of the letter, paid them, and then told them that the study was over. But before they left the lab, they were given the opportunity to write Mike. And what we found was that the majority of the meditators, 63% of the meditators in red, wrote Mike, even though they didn't need to. There was no obligation for them to write Mike, whereas only a minority of the non-meditators wrote Mike. So they not only... The meditators were not only more likely to write Mike, they wrote longer letters, and they also wrote more compassionate letters. They wrote letters that included more empathy, more forgiveness, and more optimism. And so the results from this study suggest that meditation does increase this very difficult kind of compassion. And if I weren't a scientist, I would be really happy with these findings, and I would stop here. But scientists aren't easily happy until they rule out other explanations. And so in this case, it could be that meditation leads to more of this kind of compassion, or it could be that this kind of compassion is due to the people who choose to meditate. It might be that the people who choose to meditate are more likely to write, were more likely to write Mike. So it wasn't really the effects of meditation, but these pre-existing characteristics. And so we did a second study that was funded by CCARE to rule out this explanation. In this study, we randomly assigned people to a meditation class, and we also looked at different types of meditation to see if it was all meditation, types of meditation that lead to greater compassion, or if it was a specific type of meditation. And this is work that I did with my students, Birgit Koopman-Home, who's in the audience, and Cameron Oakes. So in this study, we randomly assigned Stanford students to one of 4 groups. The first two groups were meditation groups. The first group was a compassion meditation group, and they underwent the compassion meditation program, an earlier version of the one that Erica just presented earlier, and that was developed by Jimpa. The second group underwent an 8-week mindfulness meditation course like John Kabat-Zinn. The third group underwent an improvisational theater class. This is a class that teaches students to be spontaneous and cooperative, and we included this class because we wanted to be able to differentiate the effects of taking a class in which you learn a new skill, you're taught in a group by a teacher, and you have materials and homework from the effects of a meditation class specifically. And then the last fourth of the participants were in a no class control, so they didn't take the class at all. So these participants, the participants in the classes took a 2-hour class once a week for 8 weeks, And at the end of the 8 weeks, they were presented with a letter that I showed you earlier. And they were asked questions about the letter. And then they were paid, told the study was over, and then given an opportunity to write. And so our hypotheses were that the people in the meditation classes would be more likely to behave compassionately toward the convicted murderer than those in the control classes, and that the participants in the compassion meditation class would be particularly compassionate. So contrary to our hypotheses, we found no differences between the groups in the percentage of people who wrote, in the length of the letters, in empathy or how empathetic or sympathetic the letters were. Yeah. How forgiving or accepting the letters were. But don't worry, we did find a difference in how optimistic and encouraging the groups were. And it was the participants in the compassion meditation group who were more optimistic and encouraging toward the convicted murderer than any other group. So more than the controls and more than the participants in the mindfulness meditation. Now, when we've talked to people about these results, they've said, well, maybe the people in the compassion meditation are just more positive overall. They just are more positive about everything, and maybe they're unrealistic. But we also, But we also asked the participants how much they thought that Mike, the convicted murderer, deserved the sentence that he had. And in this case, the participants in the compassion meditation class felt that he deserved his sentence even more than the other groups. So it wasn't that they were unrealistic. They were very realistic, and yet they still had hope and optimism for Mike. So in summary, the previous differences that we found may have been due to these pre-existing characteristics of people who are likely to meditate. But compassion meditation, based on this first preliminary study, seems to uniquely influence how optimistic and encouraging and hopeful people are toward a convicted murderer. And so the implications are that while these pre-existing characteristics may account for some of the results, some of the differences between meditators and non-meditators, compassion meditation does have a specific effect. And remember, this is based on novices, people who had no experience meditating before they took the class. And so compassion meditation for these individuals seems to give them hope about the future of other people, even those who appear to be in very hopeless situations. And what we know is that having hope for another person can make all the difference in terms of the course of their life. So in future work, we'd like to look at longer-term meditators. Again, this was only 8 weeks, so we wonder how the effects will be different after people have been meditating for longer. We'd like to look at other forms of compassion. Remember, this was the most difficult type of compassion to feel, and we'd like to see whether this kind of compassion meditation program has similar effects in other cultures and with other religions. And so I'd like to end by thanking CCARE again, as well as all the people who were involved in these projects, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dini. Thank you. So we've heard 3 presentations on the cultivation of compassion, not only the description of the actual program itself, but also 2 research studies which have illuminated from quite different sides the particulars of this field. And I think we're grateful to you as a hard-minded pair of scientists looking at the details of this and trying to tease out those features which are distinguishing from those which are delusory in a certain way. So thank you very much. And I don't know, first I'd like to see if His Holiness has a particular question that might have arisen during the course. I noticed that you were comparing it, for example, to your own experience. That is to say, as a meditator, how it is that it worked for you, what it is that was generated as you did the compassion exercises. Did you find a connection to the data that was being presented from your own experience to the experiments that are being done here?
Obviously, through training means making familiarity. Say, definitely to the increase or shaping way of thinking. That's definitely. That much I can say through my own experience. As far as I'm Buddhist, so my practice is a Buddhist practice, the concept of emptiness, and also the altruism, through sort of not very rigorous, but in daily basis as a practice. So decade by decade, obvious sort of change. That's there. So that means that through training of mind, attitude can change, motivation can change. As a result, your basic mental state much calm, much happier. That also does not mean your mental attitude becomes something indifferent. No. So that much I know. But then, this time, Ningji, Didi Marve, and the Ningji lo Jamba Digi, and the courage. Look, naturally, or naturally, one. Then, Kondu Shushuki in a current natural legal limit. Come make with Charapachikan, Lo Shushuki. Sometimes.
So His Holiness is, interested in the point that you made about how compassion training seems to have an effect on sustained attention. But His Holiness wants to ask you, because, even in the case of anger, when you are single-pointedly angry about something, there is an element of sustained attention to the object, the focus of your anger.
Just a little bit.
But has any work been done, something similar? This function of sustained attention and anger.
Yes,
different emotion. When you see that particular emotion getting a little stronger, then some way focusing on single pointed.
On a target.
On target. So then in that case,
so if that is the case, then clearly the effect that you are seeing is not a direct effect of compassion. Something else is happening there.
Possibly. But I think it's a good point that different emotions will facilitate different kinds of focused attention.
Yes.
And but I haven't seen research that's delineated that for each, like sadness, happiness,
yes.
anger, jealousy. But so I don't know.
There has been some research that's distinguished between high arousal states and low arousal states. And the high arousal states, like anger, as well as like enthusiasm, seem to focus attention more, whereas the lower arousal states, like calm, seem to widen attention, which I think is consistent with what you were describing.
Arousal, non-arousal, 또 벽에 나가려고 숙지
단 점버로 치.
점버 숙지 좀 그렇죠.
네, 그래서 또 심도.
또 소용 숙지 좀 그렇죠.
Does this make sense to you, Your Holiness?
Oh yes.
Yes?
Very interesting. So I think a lot of sort of further sort of research. I think both field research, the theoretical level research, and practical level research. Right?
네.
Yeah, some of the condition got some that one.
There needs to be kind of research from two ends. One is at the level of theoretical understanding. There needs to be more fine-tuning of the concepts. But then at the practical level, there's another element of research by looking more, through a kind of actual experiment.
I was, in fact, wondering about this with regards to your understanding, from perhaps even out of the Buddhist tradition, concerning the theory of compassion. How is it you understand compassion? How is it you understand the meditation methods themselves which lead to the development of compassion? In science, we have not only an empirical result, if we do this, then something happens, but that we also try to understand the theoretical foundations for this. Is there a way in which this is described within your philosophical framework?
I think from the Buddhist viewpoint, I think ancient Indian thought. That means those traditions, Buddhism, non-Buddhism, they are sort of training of mind, or mainly the practice of samadhi, concentration, and also vipassana is common in Buddhism and non-Buddhism, ancient India. So firstly, some kind of map about mind or consciousness. Then the zosim simju siyawacha, simju desemangucha, any kundrunga yunginga sadutete, that is really good.
For example, in the Buddhist psychology, we have a kind of a basic taxonomy of the mental world. So you have at a very fundamental level, distinction between the primary awareness and then the modalities of that awareness, which are referred to as mental factors. And within those modalities, we speak of 5 omnipresent factors, which are always there at any given moment. Then you have other object determining factors. So you have this complex taxonomy of mental world, and within that framework, we understand phenomena. So let's take example of compassion. We speak of compassion, but then we are already talking about a very complex mental phenomena, which has many different aspects. For example, like in any given moment, when you are paying an attention or sustained attention on any object, in that experience, whether it is emotional or cognitive experience, there is an element of single-pointedness of the mind. So that's why I was citing the example of anger.
So naturally, as far as I notice the scientific sort of research. Now the Paul Ekman Bandijua, Dong Nam Jugutane, Sheben Kasota Tokben Juamenda Shashtua. At the Zutedi, and this research in Alzute, Tindisiomari. These will never get warisha.
For example, in Paul Ekman's work, there's a lot of development that has been based on understanding facial expressions of emotions and some of the detailed descriptions of specific types of family of emotions that some of those are not found in the Buddhist taxonomy. So His Holiness was saying that maybe we need to incorporate those into the Buddhist psychology.
So actually, I think yesterday I mentioned, actually we are working on a document or text, the science Kundus.
It's a project that's referred to as creating a compendium of science or sciences.
지르다 낭셔다 지금 모디베 숑의 등산 세리베 타네지 단 지금 남주로 만나면서 통한데 드즈테 상월로는 수 뛰셔니 지금 나 심크체 아니 치 가서다 뒤처럼 체리 뒤에 모디베 숑의 등산 누적베다 체리도 셔야 돼 상월이 되지.
So the project involves, for example, creating a textbook that represent compendium of gathering all the insights and understanding of, say, for example, in the field of science of mind, there will be science of mind drawn from the Buddhist classical texts, similarly from non-Buddhist Indian classical texts, and including contemporary psychology and neuroscience. Similarly, in, say, for example, in physics, the compendium would draw from early Buddhist, discussions about physics and also the non-Buddhist Indian traditions, and then it will be including contemporary scientific understanding of physics and so on.
It's a great project.
Count me in.
Although good project, nobody pay.
I work cheap, that's all right. Do any of the panelists, any of the presenters, any of you have a question?
I'm hoping, we are hoping, I think next 6 months, may draft maybe. So we are thinking, is it translation, English translation, and the Chinese, and a few more language. So it can be, it's a purely academic sort of subject. No mention,
There are no evaluative components in it. It's simply a descriptive. Yeah.
So far, although there are some material about inner science as well as external science in Buddhist text, but then you have to refer that.
Yes. So at this point, in order to get these information, you have to actually look into the text themselves, which makes it difficult to access. So the idea is to create a compendium so that the general readers do not need to actually look at the classical sources themselves. They can look at the compendium.
Then philosophy. Then the philosophy called Tepchik. So
we are also creating a compendium on philosophy.
So although that is mainly meant for Tibetan, for the younger generation, and I think Buddhist generations, and of course in the West, in the scientific research work, also I think can be helpful, benefit, like that. So in any way, I think we need a lot of research work, because of that, combined, scientific sort of way of research, and then
So also from the perspective of, say, Buddhist contemplative science and psychology.
One of my critics is usually we study these things, but finally relying on quotation, text. So then no further explanation. So that's limitation.
So sometimes in the classical tradition, they tend to be contented with what the text says, and it creates a kind of unnecessary limitation.
It's a tendency we have in the West also, I think.
그래서
Joleti Oris.
Your Holiness, are you open to another question or two? Would anyone from any of the presenters like to pose? I have a few up my sleeve still. Jeannie, do you have something?
Most of these meditation protocols revolve around 8 weeks. And my question is, I don't know if you can answer it, but how much time do you think is a reasonable amount of time for training before you see significant changes?
whole life.
Whole life.
Now, of course, obviously, it's my own case. I think I developed genuine sort of interest, the practice, I think around 15, 16 year old. Before that, just like boy, no interest. Then gradually you start more sort of more serious sort of practice and study as well. So I think this is some real sort of shape, new shape, way of thinking. Perhaps my age, maybe in late 20s and early 30s. Then gradually 50s, 60s, because of that deeper, deeper, deeper. Of course, still, I cannot say my sort of spiritual experience is something very high. No, never. Still, little above zero.
Significantly different from zero.
So even that, it should take a lot of years, isn't it? One thing definitely I can say. One thing I can state, definitely with confidence, mind can change through training, through awareness. That's a sure.
I was just going to say something in response to what Jeannie was saying, and my experience with this length of training, and it's a model that's been used a lot, like John Kabat-Zinn's program, is that maybe what's happening there is that we're getting people launched, that we're moving them from a place of not even looking inward or looking at that or opening their hearts to where they're now over some threshold and they're doing it. Because my experience as a teacher, and even at Google where we had this small group of people who were working really hard and couldn't seem to attend, and but they managed, after the end of the class, they all got together and they wanted to figure out how they would continue to meet and practice in spite of their incredibly difficult work schedules. And so I think that, and I don't know if we're assessing it that way. It's interesting that they've gone over this threshold. So maybe they've made the commitment and they've shifted in certain skills and now they can move on.
Sometimes people say compassion towards another individual helps to reduce the suffering of that one person through the altruistic behavior that compassion results in. But is there a deeper understanding, something where we don't only look at the individual case, this moment, a moment of compassion, but we begin to work at a more universal level, at a more profound level to release people from suffering, release ourselves as well as others from suffering? How is it we approach this question at a still deeper level?
지당 배짜에 삼당당 교당제 띵사버 지당 캡침불 가사 지다버질 또 먹고 왜 닝지 없이 고민해 여러분스. 닝지. 심지 담절을 메시지 쓰려나.
콩도 우차샤나 폐지 심지 지라고 지 폐지 고입을 수도. 봐도 심지 찌르면 콩도 폐지를 용기하다 맨날 메시. 단 닝지도 마도 걸로 셔라. 니신들로 말봐. 듬베리 그러. 심지 찌르면 콩도.
So His Holiness was saying that his own personal observation is that it may not be true. He feels that if you compare, say, anger with compassion, anger is a type of emotion that seems to need a kind of a concrete target, an individual object for it to arise and to be sustained. Whereas compassion, although may arise in the context naturally, in a concrete context, but compassion seems to be a type of emotion which actually can be generalized and cultivated and without requiring any specific concrete objects to all beings. So he was wondering whether it makes any sense to be angry towards everybody, to the entire being.
And 두지기 동네기 샤완체 리아다 벨민디별로 시게요 뭐이나 두지기 동네기 샤완체 심지어 타다름이 그지 찍어 심지어 지라고 문제입니다.
For example, in the Buddhist meditation context, there is a particular practice that aims to cultivate compassion on the basis of recognizing the deeper causes of suffering, and particularly conditioning as a form of, a state of being. And once you generate that kind of compassion, then compassion seems to move beyond the limitations of specific concrete individuals, because you are now generating compassion on the basis of recognizing a situation that is common to all beings, and on that basis generating compassion. So it seems that the mental processes that we all have seem to be such a complex world that each seems to have its own way of operating.
Thank you, Your Holiness. Thank you very much. Quite a powerful picture of moving from the individual towards whom one has compassion to the conditions under which we all, as human beings, live and towards which we can have compassion more generally. Thank you very much. And thanks to our presenters, first of all, for the...
Sorry.
Go right ahead.
유되기 차와라 소 미가 아이성기 이 차와디 제법들이야 소 콘서트 수도 닝질러나 두년시 디간에 삼다니 디차나 사별로 축세도
So another
그래서 두년지 때마다 두년이 뭐지 전쟁들이 있는 또 두년시 저거
So another difference between the two is that in the case of anger, against someone who has done something to you, although the act is involved, which really made you angry, but anger seems to be focused not so much on what was done, but rather to the person, who's responsible.
Of course, use the reason he or she done such thing. Therefore, I feel angry. So the actual target is the person, not the sort of cause of the action.
Action.
Oh.
No.
But whereas compassion,
So although in the case of compassion, the focus of your compassion is that person who's suffering, but the reason for that is really because of that suffering. So compassion seems to take suffering as a more primary focus, and the person...
So these differences. But this is not clearly mentioned in our text. But this come from Dalai Lama's mind. Of course, we need, you see, these sort of further
Discussion.
analytical
Exploration.
discussion.
No.
It gets more shot.
So these kind of further exploration, getting deeper into this processes seems to be really important.
That's great. We have another research program, I think, that's being proposed, so thank you very much for that. And we're going to have to transition from this group to our final group. Thank you, all three of you, for the work you've done and for the presentations you've given.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.